again, so this copy feature basically allows you to, if you needed to have a copy of a file in multiple folders within your database, that is what this feature is for. So for example, if you had, maybe you have a bunch of medical expenses that you're saving in one folder and you want them separate from your regular expenses, but you also want to store a copy of all of your medical expenses in your general expenses folder. Because maybe you want to run a report at the end of the year and it'll make it really easy to just run a report on all your expenses if you have a copy of all of your medical expenses with the general expenses. So, right now I'm looking at my medical folder. I have 6 files that I'm looking at within this folder currently. And I have this Rite Aid receipt here up at the top. We're going to copy this one as an example. So if you ever need to copy a file, what you'll do is you can right click on the file and choose copy from the right click menu here. You can also put a check mark next to a file that you want to copy and click the ellipses menu down here at the bottom right-hand corner of Neat and choose copy this way. But you can also, if you're in the middle of editing a file, like I am right now, I'm viewing this file, maybe I'm making edits and changes to it. You can also copy your file from here as well by just clicking copy in the menu bar, the action bar here at the bottom. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this file. Whenever you copy a file in Neat, it's going to ask you where you want to store your copied file. Most users will probably store it in a different folder. In this example, I would probably move it to my expenses folder. But for the purposes of this demonstration, I'm going to copy it and save it in the exact same folder this original file is in. And that's because I want to take a look at the original file and the copied file and show you the difference between the two. When you click copy, it'll just take a moment to finish copying, and then you'll get this congratulations message here. So I'm going to close this. I'm going to close this screen as well. Now we can see I have 7 files in this medical folder now, and that's because I copied a file. We can see here's my original file. If I open it up, I can see my vendor details, my payment details, and amount details. I can also see category details, any additional file fields that I entered, and notes about my file. So that's the original one. If I take a look at the copied file, what you'll notice is they look exactly the same. They're the same thing, basically. Whenever you make a copy of a file in Neat, Neat is going to copy everything, all of your file field data, all of your notes. So all of your notes will be copied as well. And then obviously the file image will be copied also. So Neat creates an exact copy of the original file in the state it was in at the time of copying. So if I were to edit the original file, those edits would not make its way onto the copy. I would then need to recopy that file after I made changes if I wanted to have a copy of the file in that state, if that makes sense. So that's how I can copy one file. Again, Neat makes an exact replica of the file that you copied. What if you needed to copy multiple files at a time? That is also a possibility. Let's say, for example, I wanted to copy all of these medical expenses and save a copy of them also in my expenses, my general expenses folder for 2024. I can go ahead and I can select all the files I want to copy. I can select everything that I'm currently viewing by clicking this little box up here along the column headers up at the top. If I put a little check mark there, it'll select everything. But I can also go through and select certain specific files. I'm going to deselect this file because then I'll have 2 of the same file in my expenses folder. I can go ahead and I can right click and choose copy. I did see somebody mention something about being able to move a file. Absolutely. You can move files that way as well by right clicking and choosing move and then moving your file somewhere else. In this case, we're choosing copy. I'm going to go ahead and click copy, and I'm going to save these files to my expenses folder. And actually, before I do that, I just want to show you the expenses folder currently is empty. There's nothing in my expenses folder. So everything that I move there is going to be brand new. So I'm going to copy all of these. I'm going to move the copies or send the copies to my expenses folder. And now we can see Neat is working to copy all 6 files for me. And when it's done, it'll show me a congratulations message. And now if I go over to my expenses folder, we can see all 6 files that I copied are here, including, all of the notes, all of the projects associated with my files, all the categories, all of the details are now here also in my expenses folder. So this is great because it eliminates a lot of manual work that you would have to do if you wanted to store a file in more than one space. This eliminates the need to have to like scan a file multiple times or export a file and re-import it or import a file multiple times. Instead, you can streamline that process just by right-clicking and copying your file to another location. Now, I mentioned splitting file, or I mentioned splitting expense categories earlier. So I wanted to show that as well. So this copy feature, while not a perfect split feature tool, does offer you a workaround for how you can split a file into different expense categories or into different payment types or different projects, whatever your needs are. I have this folder here that I manually created called What's New and Neat. You guys will not have this folder in your database, so don't let that confuse you. I manually created this folder. And I have this Rite Aid receipt here. I'm going to open up this Rite Aid receipt. And what this Rite Aid receipt captures is that when I made this purchase, I purchased a prescription, which is associated with medical expenses. And I also purchased some groceries at the same time, which would be associated with the groceries expense category. So I have two different expense categories that I might want to associate with this file, and I might want to run reports on later. I might want to keep my medical expenses separate from my general grocery expenses. If that's something that I want to do, then you can use this copy feature to create two items in your database that you can associate with different expense categories. So let me show you what I mean by that. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to copy this file. We're going to save it right back to the folder that I'm currently in. So now we can see I have two Rite Aid receipts. Now what I can go in and do is I can edit both of these files. So the first one, I can change the amount to the amount of my prescription, which was $4.07. That is this pharmacy item right here, 407. I'm going to remove the sales tax from this item because the prescription itself was not taxed. And I was able to figure that out because the receipt itself shows me that it's not taxable. You can actually look to your receipt for details about which items are taxable and things like that if you need to change the sales tax total. But the prescription itself was not taxed. And then what I can do is I want to associate this with a different category. So I'll change this over to prescription instead. So now I have a file, a Rite Aid receipt that is capturing this prescription purchase for $4.07. And I'll go ahead and I'll click save. Then what I can also do is I can go back in and I can edit my other file. So I can change the amount to 2733 minus the 407 that was there, which is like 2326, I believe. And I can leave the sales tax associated with this file because the only taxable item on my receipt is associated with that amount. And then I can leave the category as groceries and save. And now what I've done is I have two of the same receipt in Neat, two of the same images. The images are exactly the same for both of these files. However, what I now have are two separate items that are tracking two different expense categories and amounts for me. And so when I run a report later on, if I'm running a report on medical expenses, only that $4.07 will be included in my medical expenses report, and it won't include that additional $23.26 that I spent on groceries, giving me a more accurate representation of exactly how much money I spent on medical expenses during whatever time period I'm running my report on. Another great example is this giant receipt. So in this giant receipt, the total of this giant receipt was $214.60. However, we can see that I paid for a portion of that $214.60 using a gift card. I actually paid $100 towards that $214.60 using a gift card instead of my Visa card. So what I could do is if I wanted to specifically track my Visa card expenses separate from other expenses that I have, is I could use this copy feature to create a copy of this file and then change the payment types for each so that I can more accurately reflect how much I paid towards each payment type. So we'll go ahead and we'll copy this file. Copy. Again, my file is I now have two giant receipts here, and I'll just so they're both up at the top. I can go ahead and I can edit this file. We'll change the amount for this file to $100, which is how much I paid using that gift card. And then we'll change the payment type over to gift card. I'll remove the sales tax total from the gift card itself, and we'll leave the category as groceries. And now I can go into my other giant receipt. I can leave the payment type because it's associated with my Visa. I can change my amount to $214.60 minus the $100 I spent or I paid for using the gift card. So it would be $114.60. I'll leave the sales tax associated with this file, and I'll leave the category as groceries. And now what I have in my database, again, is the same receipt twice. The image themselves are the same. However, I have two separate line items essentially showing me how I spent $100 towards this purchase using a gift card and $114 towards this purchase using my Visa. And again, I'll get more accurate reports in the future because, it will remove the gift card total out of a report I'm generating to see how much I spent on my Visa card.